Welcome to Like Nobody's Business, the podcast that goes beyond the bottom line and reaches deep into the heart of what really matters for women entrepreneurs, leaders, and founders today. I'm Emily, your host and founder of WMNûp, a global movement community, an infinite upward spiral of visionary, resourced women entrepreneurs. I'm also a business strategist and leadership coach and a 6- and 7-figure business mentor for women entrepreneurs with over a decade of experience serving women across industries to build regenerative, intentional, and innovative business ecosystems that are transforming the world for good, without sacrificing profitability, our integrity with our values, or what matters most along the way. Here, we know that business isn't just about commerce or consumerism. It's about culture and policy. It's about challenging the systems that keep us all from rising, amplifying solutions that move us forward, and reclaiming what it is truly our business to care about as women today, at a time where many systems and structures are in dire need of recalibration for more equitable futures for all. Each week, I'll sit down with values-driven women leaders, activists, authors, researchers, and innovators who are on the front lines of shaping the conversations that matter most, issues of equity, upward mobility, and dismantling systems of oppression within ourselves, our work, and the world. Because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. And these challenges, they're not just someone else's problem. They're our business. And together, we're here to rise, resist, and reimagine the future. This is our space to facilitate and engage in the conversations women need to be having. It's time to woman up, get uncomfortable, be brave, and take bold action that blazes new trails, both in your business and beyond. So pull up a chair, get ready to be activated, and let's dive in together. We've got this. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to be here with you today and to introduce you to Nathan H. Lents. He is the author of The Sexual Revolution. I have the physical copy of the book right here if you're watching. And this book is all about how 500 million years of sex, gender, and mating shape modern relationships. This conversation is going to be so interesting, so timely. We were saying before we started recording, it's almost urgent, not just timely. And Nathan is a professor of biology at John Jay College, SUNY, and the author of Human Errors and Not So Different. So this is your third book, I think, unless there's anything not listed there. He's also appeared on national media, including The Today Show, 48 Hours, NPR, and Access Hollywood. He lives in Queens, New York. And we're so lucky to get him on the show today and get to have this conversation. So welcome, Nathan. It's so great to meet you.
Thanks very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So let's dig right in. I'm so curious about what drew you to this type of research and how long have you been studying this? And give us let's geek out for a second and give us like your nerdy educational juiciness about this topic.
Well, I study human evolution and I study it from the genetic point of view. So I study genes and how they evolve and how the control of those genes evolves over time. And I've always been fascinated with human uniqueness, what makes humans different than everything else that is on the planet. And because we do have some pretty peculiar things about us, we're not just a run-of-the-mill ape, we are different. And so I've always been fascinated by that, and that's what my laboratory studies. But then if you'll notice from my writings, what I'm writing a lot about is the ways that we're not different than other animals. And in fact, that was the title of my first book, as you mentioned, was Not So Different. And it's funny, my mother once described it as, you found a way to even argue with yourself. And the reason why I do that, why I study and why humans are different and how we're not different, is I think that both perspectives are really important to understand why we are the way that we are. We are other animals. We are animals. We have kinship with the other apes, with the other primates, with the other mammals. And there's the consequences and signs of that in our bodies and our minds. But we are also different. We do some peculiar things, some different things. And so to really understand human nature and why we're this way, you need to appreciate both perspectives, our continuity with other animals and what makes us different. And so this book was born about through, I've been teaching the biology of sex and gender for 15 years. And in my class, I always have students bring original research, like articles that they find in the literature of research studies that are done in other creatures regarding their sexual behaviors and reproductive behaviors and sex differences and all of the things related to sex and gender. And this book was really born out of 15 years of doing that, in the sense of we kept discovering, my students and I, all of these examples where, for example, gender diversity is really present in other species in a way that the scientists themselves weren't always mentioning and discussing.
Mm.
So they would talk about males do this and females do this, as if every male does the same thing and every female does the same thing. But right in their own notes, in their own data that they present, there's lots of exceptions. There's lots of examples where there's different kinds of males that don't do the expected things or don't look the expected way. And the same is true for females as well. Although we understand a little bit more about male gender diversity than female gender diversity, simply because, I'm sorry to say, there's a heavy bias towards studying male animals over female animals. You might have thought that the bias that we have towards males was restricted to our own species, but unfortunately, it also affects how we study other animals. And other researchers are starting to write about that problem too, about how the female of the species is often just either ignored or overly simplified. And so my students and I would come across these examples of gender diversity, as we would call it, and where animals behave in atypical ways based on their sex. And I was frustrated at how often the scientists dismissed it, ignored it, explained it away. They would consider them runts or suboptimal. These are the kind of words that would be used. And I realized that a new framework is overdue in animal behavior. We really need to think about animals as having gender diversity, meaning different flavors of maleness and femaleness, different ways that you can be successful and contribute and find pair bonds and or even refuse to participate in pair. There's all kinds of diversity that was basically just being brushed under the rug. And we're seeing a change. It's very slow and it's almost always very young researchers but we are seeing a resurgence, I think, of appreciating animal sex, gender, and other forms of diversity. So that's why I wrote the book, to tell the world that there's a lot more going on with the animals than you might think, and that is often presented to you. And that has implications for us because we are in keeping with other animals. They're our evolutionary cousins. And so if there's gender diversity in other species, we shouldn't be surprised that there's gender diversity in our species. In fact, it would be weird if there weren't. So that's what prompted the book.
Wow, this is so amazing. I just love hearing you talk about it. I'm like, okay, can I take your class? This is so interesting. But yeah, the thing that I'm noticing right now in culture, politics, all of it, is this idea that, and I'd love for you to speak about this too, this sort of like binary reductive idea that you're supposed, like, good men, and the way to be a man is specifically to be this alpha man, which I think is also incredibly reductive and probably incorrect if you actually speak about it in biological evolutionary terms. But like you're saying, this idea and trying to fit and like push and contort people into these very limited expressions of gender performance almost, or yeah, I guess gender performance is the best way to say it. Like a good woman, a right woman, a right man, a good man, whatever, a best, like whatever that top expression is. In which case, like, it just, like you're saying, it negates the value and the contribution that is important for all other types. Like the idea, especially my work and my audience is primarily women, and just thinking about, yeah, even something so simple as you should want to be a mother, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you. Where for me personally, I've never felt that strong pull. And actually, where I find value and contribution is like supporting other women who are mothers in their mothering and being an auntie and like my friends' kids, that kind of support. And when I look at that from the cultural, biological utility, it makes so much sense. If we all don't have the bandwidth to, be able to support each other because we're doing our own tending and nurturing of everyone else, how is that sustainable? Like,
Yeah.
from a cultural lens, it makes so much sense to me intuitively, but I love hearing about the research and what you're finding around this because it really is interesting. And then on the other hand, the idea of, we talked a little bit about this before recording, but this executive order that's come out with there are only two genders. And it's like, why are we fighting so hard to cling on to something that maybe we just have more info on now that isn't actually true? Like, what? It's just so much easier for people. It's like lazy thinking that we can still uphold and fight to protect these weird systems we created that are based on this. And if we don't have this truth that unites it and holds it together, then it all falls apart and it all crumbles. And then what? Oh my God, what are we going to do? We would have to evolve. We would have to evolve as humanity, as a human species. And so I would love to hear your hot takes on that because I've got so many things in my brain and I'm like, you're the expert. Take us to school.
Well, you said it really well. You really, I couldn't have said it better myself. We do have a bias in our species to try to reduce our biology to two buckets when it comes to
Mm.
sex and gender, two buckets, male and female. And you can see when you read research papers about animal behavior how frustrated sometimes they are when they find creatures that don't fit in the buckets. If it's a male who acts in unusual ways, we say he's a female mimic because if you only have two buckets and he doesn't fit in this one, you only have one other choice. So he's got, and it
Wow.
pigeon our approach to this. It is overly reductive, as you mentioned, because life does not traffic in binaries. It's just not how nature works, right? Nature always traffics in spectra, right? It's always a continuum. We call it continuous variation. What you really see in nature with sex differences is continuous variation. So I want you to picture like a bell curve, right? But a two-humped bell curve with two peaks in
Mm.
it. That's really how almost all sex differences are, whether it's
Mm.
in humans or in other animals. And think about any trait that shows a sex difference. Let's take a simple one, a non-controversial one, height. The
Mhm.
average man is a few inches taller than the average woman, right? So you have a bell curve with two peaks on it. But we all know plenty of women who are taller than plenty of men, right? So there's plenty of exceptions. There's plenty of people in the middle. There's plenty of people who don't fit in their expected bucket. But remember, it's our expectations that are not being met. There's nothing wrong with that person,
Mm.
right? Nature loves variety and plays around with that. But that's just height. You can do the same thing with other sex difference. Think about basal metabolic rate. We are told what men's and women's averages are. But what that doesn't tell us is the ranges and how much they overlap and how people won't fit in their buckets. You can take red blood cell count, you can take white blood cell count, you can take the size of your preoptic area in your hypothalamus, whatever sex difference you can think of, hormone levels, hormone ratios, all of those exist in this bimodal spectrum, a continuous range of bimodal spectrum. And if
Mm.
you look at enough of those, by the way, almost all of us are going to fit outside the expectation for one of those or the other.
Right.
None of us are going to perfectly be in our bucket on all of those measures if you look at enough of them. We're all
Mm.
mosaics of these sexually dimorphic traits. And there are some people who have most of their traits in the middle, and we would call them intersex if we're talking about anatomical differences. But remember, everyone
Mhm.
focuses on the genital anatomy as if that's the only sex that the only thing that matters, like only parts of your body that matters, because all these other things that I've mentioned actually matter to us a lot more. Like your basal metabolic rate affects all kinds of things, and so do your hormone levels. And women are 9 times more likely to get lupus, right? That has nothing to do with sperm cells or egg cells. And men are more likely to have heart attacks and to die by suicide. More likely to get Parkinson's disease. Women are more likely to have depression. These are important sex differences when it comes to health and disease that have nothing to do with what's between your legs, right? And
Mhm.
even if you do care, if that's all you care about is what's between your legs, there's variation there too. We might not like to discuss it in polite company, but there's a lot of anatomical differences there. And there's nothing wrong with those people. They're almost always perfectly healthy, perfectly fertile. They're just a little different. And nature loves differences. Nature loves variety. That's what nature is all about. And so, this human tendency to create hard categories with strict definitions and firm boundaries, that's us. That's
Mm-hmm.
us trying to fit nature or reduce nature, to use your words, to these nice, neat categories because it helps us make sense of the world. But I'm sorry, that's just not how nature works, and it's not what we see when we study the
Mm-hmm.
natural world. It's always bursting out of the categories and creating exceptions to our definitions. And so we need to rethink those definitions and remember that the differences are important. They're not just freaks or flukes or exceptions, but that they're potentially important members of the species. If we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
animals, humans, whatever. But yeah, so nature doesn't make binaries. We exist in between, and we have these continuous differences. And that's a big lesson of the book that to be honest, I would have made a bigger deal about that if I had written this book now. But it was
Mm-hmm.
finished last summer when I was reacting to something different. And it's become much more important now because we have executive orders coming out that are defining males. So everybody has to be male or female based on the gametes they make at conception. How many biological errors can we make in one sentence? Because
Right.
you don't make
Is it?
gametes at conception. You won't make gametes for a
No.
long time after conception. But it's not all reducible to gametes, and that's what I mean. If your maleness and your femaleness is only found in your sperm and your egg, then all of those important sex differences that I was just talking about don't matter. Those matter way more to your daily life, to your health, and how often does it really matter which gamete you make? That just is just not that important. But
Mm-hmm.
I think it's telling that they've retreated to that because that
Yeah.
really is the closest thing we have to a perfect binary is sperm and eggs. Really, that's anything higher than that throughout your body is this sort of messy spectrum. But biology is messy and creative and diverse. So rather than fighting that, why don't we celebrate it? Why don't we embrace it? Because it's not hurting anyone.
Right.
And if you are very typical for your sex and your attractions are mostly heterosexual, you fit within your expected, great. No one has a problem with that. You will never
Mm-hmm.
be persecuted for that. No one
Right.
will care about
Right.
that.
Right.
So why don't you offer that same grace, that same freedom, that same autonomy to people who don't fit the expected buckets through just accidents of nature? They're just a little different. And nature loves variety. We should too.
Oh, so good. It's funny that we're having this conversation today because I actually have living in Charleston, I have a representative you've probably heard of if you're following this debate, Nancy Mace, who
Mhm.
represents technically our district in the House of Representatives.
Mhm.
And her legislation recently has been really troubling. And I just posted something on Instagram this morning unpacking this because something that she did speak out about was this sort of really crazy thing that had affected her personally, but also there's just like people doing weird exploitative things and raping women. And of course, nobody's saying that's wrong.
Mhm.
However, the conflation of in order to protect women, quotes, in quotes, needing to this binary way of thinking does not allow for the intersectionality required to legislate properly and actually protect the people that it's meant to protect without also marginalizing, creating more hate, more division, less inclusion, while you're painting these people who are just different than you or different than what you personally think should be your own mental projection that you made up and then tried to overlay onto reality and biology because that's the fact and you don't like that. It's inconvenient for you to hold all of that nuance or a truth that competes with your religious beliefs or whatever, instead of just saying, huh, that's interesting. Something I don't understand. I can lean into more and actually learn and be curious and expand the thing so that I don't fear it so much. Because if we understand it, we don't fear it and we're not limited by it in our view, right? And instead of doing that, there's a retreating and there's a legislating and there's a hate at trans people and calling them predators. There are
Well,
less trans
where's the
people.
data that trans people are
I would love to see it.
are rampantly victimizing anyone? You are in no danger in a woman's bathroom due to a trans
Mm-mm.
person. In fact, trans people are much more likely to be victims of violence in
Right.
men's bathrooms than the opposite. You will not find, you go look, you will not find many reports. I don't know if there are any reports of a trans person, of a truly trans person victimizing anybody in a women's bathroom, but you will find
No.
many reports of trans people being beaten up by cis men in bathrooms or
Mm-hmm.
wherever else. So there is a violence problem here, but they have the arrow pointing in exactly the wrong direction. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what's so vicious about this is it's not like this is just an issue where we politely disagree and we see the world a little differently. A community that is already very marginalized is now being held up as a scapegoat for
Right.
men, for violence by men.
Who are
There is a
often,
segment of our population that is particularly dangerous, and that is cisgendered men. They are the most
exactly.
dangerous segment of our population. And so the
Yep.
idea that we're protecting anyone, that's who we need people. That's why women's bathrooms.
Hey, love, it's Emily. I'm interrupting this podcast episode really fast just to tell you something that's a secret I forgot I was keeping and didn't mean to keep from you, which is that we actually have a free space for you to dive into at WMNûp called Calibrate. I was asked recently if we have a monthly option or a trial to test out the community before joining us for a full year. We don't, and we've actually tried that before, and ultimately we made the choice to not offer it because it was actually a disservice and antithetical to our teachings, values, offerings, and integrity of our space, which is truly founded on transformational, deep, long-term relationship building and community participation and engagement, both of which require commitment. Because actually, all transformational change, evolution, and growth requires the precedent of commitment. That being said, I know that you want to make sure that your investment will be aligned and that the work that we do at WMNûp is the right fit for you and your business at this point in time. And if you haven't already felt that through listening to this podcast, Calibrate is the perfect way to kind of test it out. And we solved this problem just a few months ago and admittedly have not been too vocal about what that pathway looks like for you. So I'm popping into the podcast today to let you know about it and let you know that we've built this entire free space for you inside Calibrate on our Circle platform, which is where all of our other programs and services are offered as well. So for those of you who are curious about becoming a member of the community or maybe applying to one of our mastermind experiences, Momentum if you're growing to 6 figures plus, or the Leadership Mastermind if you're scaling from multiple 6 figures to 7 figures and beyond, this free space will support you to plug into our frequency, our vibes, our ethos at WMNûp, to begin to calibrate up to your next WMNûp moment and initiate your infinite upward spiral of evolution and a new way of leading, growing, and scaling a regenerative business ecosystem with intention, innovation, and impact. Once you're inside, you'll receive free access to an amuse-bouche of resources to help you woman up, including our juicy training videos and masterclasses, including our 3-part Infinite Upward Spiral masterclass and our Visionary masterclass, our business ecosystem template that you can plug into any project management tool that you're already using, like Asana, Trello, Monday, Notion, whatever you like to use, and a training video from me walking you through exactly how to use it to get organized in the back end of your business. We also have some incredible replays of our 3-day Big Visionary Energy virtual conference for female founders that we hosted in October, which is a real incredible activation and virtual conference that is self-paced and you can go through at your own, in your own time, in your own way. You'll also get access to our events calendar for non-members. We have a separate event calendar inside the community for our paid members. But think live trainings and virtual happy hours. Some events will be free, others will be paid. All of them happen virtually and live inside of our platform for so much ease. And you'll have the ability to submit your questions for me to answer on an upcoming solo episode of our podcast. So what do you do if you love the way that all sounds? Jump to the show notes and click that link to join Calibrate and get yourself plugged into our ecosystem. It's time to have your next WMNûp moment. I'm so excited to see you in there and to serve you and support you in this way. There is a plethora of resources in there. And once you're ready, Once you already know that this is the space for you, we invite you to jump up into the community for just $197 a month or $19.70 for the full year and get access to our quarterly in-person events called WMNûp Weekends. They're 2 days each. This year, we're going to be taking them all across the US, which is really exciting. So come join us. We'd love to have you. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always send me a direct message on Instagram at Emily in Your Business or at WMNûp, spelled WMNUP. Back to the episode.
Exist in the first place, right? Is because
Right.
cisgender men are dangerous.
Yes.
Right?
That's
So,
what I've been saying. I'm like, hey, guys, the left, we've been over here. The scientists, everyone has been over here talking about this for 60 plus years. Welcome to the conversation. First of all, you might better late than never. However, in 60 years since we arrived at this conclusion, if you would like to join the conversation and get caught up on what the science and data and stats actually are, and step out of the fear mongering and the scapegoating and the further marginalizing marginalized people, we can then have that conversation and welcome to progress. Like,
exactly.
I'm so confused. Wait, what? Like, you think this is like original or something? Like you like that, like welcome.
It's why I find it all disingenuous. I don't think that they're
It's so
serious.
weird.
And the thing is that these are serious issues, and there are even some
serious consequences.
Yes,
too.
but it's being handled and driven by unserious people,
Right.
who represent a serious threat, of course, but they're unserious in their approach. And it's funny that at the top, when you asked your question, you said that your podcast is mostly for women. I've been on the lecture circuit and the press circuit for this book. 85 to 90% of the podcasts I've been on are by women and for women. Even though my topic is in no way a woman's issue or directed at women. And I wouldn't dream of trying to insert myself into a conversation by and for women. I think it's hilarious to me that the women are the ones who are responding more. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think it's because
we see the problem.
The women's community is continually overlooked and blamed and scapegoated for problems created by cisgender men. And that's what's going on with bathrooms and women's sports and everything else, is cisgender men and their women allies who are totally misunderstanding the problem almost intentionally in order to avoid taking any look at themselves, to any critical look at themselves. And I'm a cisgender man myself, and I'm very aware of the problems that has come from that community. And I try to educate myself. I know I'm not perfect, but the refusal to do any form of self-reflection by that segment of our society is really why we are where we are today, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I think so too. And the psychological data shows that it's actually this like inflexible thinking, like the inability to self-reflect. Because if you did that, and I was talking about this the other day too, people are probably sick of hearing me, but hello, I'll be shouting into the void until this changes. But yeah, if you don't look at those things within yourself, or if there's resistance there, it's because it would crumble the whole house of cards you've built atop these systems that actually don't even work for the people they are designed by and for, right? Patriarchy, all of this stuff, right? As an example, patriarchal forms of religion, all of it. If you question any part of it, it can't stand. So as you're saying, the upholding of these systems is they're like reaching the limits, and it doesn't work and it doesn't make sense, but they can't admit that, or they won't, because it would mean everything is a lie. Fake.
And there's a certain privilege and power that goes with certain status. The thing is that what I would like most cisgender men to open their eyes to is that most of them don't have the privilege and power that they're so bent on upholding. Actually, it's being wielded against them as well, because patriarchy is a prison for men too. There are lots of boys who grow up told they shouldn't cry, they shouldn't cross their legs the wrong way. It's definitely a prison for men's behavior as well. And unless you're really at the top, you can be constrained by this as well. It's not, really isn't good for anyone. Actually, there's a couple examples in the book where I really point out that when you have male domination in some species, it can lead to pretty aggressive, territorial, anti-social, violent upholder of hierarchy. right?
Mhm.
Of rank and hierarchy. But when you have matriarchal species, and there's more than one or two examples of this, you don't get female dominance over men or female
Mm.
dominance over males, because we're not talking about humans. You get something much closer to egalitarianism, much closer
Mm.
to a flat social structure when the females are in charge. This is true in Barbary macaques. This is true in bonobos. This is true in many species of lemurs. And then the few human societies that have sprung up as matriarchal, the women are in charge nominally, but the system that they create is equality. There might be sex differences in terms of the roles that are played, but women don't dominate over men when they're in charge, the way that men dominate over women when they're in charge. It almost speaks to some sort of biological difference regarding power dynamics, which is
Mhm.
sad and unfortunate, but it's also something that we can resist and work against. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the pendulum is swinging so far in the other direction right now because the women's liberation and women's rights and equality had been making steady progress, as you mentioned. And more men were seeing the benefits of an equality between the sexes and why it liberates both sexes from these expectations so that you're free to live how you want to live. And now we're
Mhm.
really regressing, and it's going to be worse for everyone. Unless you're a billionaire right now, things are about to get a lot worse.
Mhm. Yep. It's wild. It's everything that's happening right now. It's just so wild to hear people who have studied things for decades, who are ringing the alarm bells, and yet there are still people supporting what's happening.
Yeah.
And it's wild. It's what do we do? And also, what I'm really curious about is in your work, as you're saying, like these different structures, different power structures and dynamics at play. What do you think is the solution here? What are we moving toward ideally? Um,
Well,
Not that you don't
yeah.
have to have all the answers,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So when it comes to politics and policy, to be honest, no, because
yeah.
everything I thought I knew about this country, it turned out to be wrong. I
Yep.
will say that we had a real chance at electing a grandmother, and I think that was the off ramp on our sanity, because if the election in 2016 had gone differently, I think we would be in a much different place. I think
Mm.
grandmothers, and I'm speaking as a biologist when I say this is not just cutesy talk.
Mhm.
Grandmothers are the key to our cultural wisdom, so much so that our species invented menopause as a way to give older women, to a way to protect them from being lost from our society. I don't know if you know this, but menopause is a programmed on purpose event that happens. It doesn't, we don't extend life to create menopause. Menopause happens about halfway through the natural lifespan. And that's on purpose. The idea being that at a certain age, a woman is so valuable to the species in terms of what she knows, what she can teach, what she offers to the group, that it's much more important that we protect her from the mortality that we know comes from childbirth. And instead of just pushing out more children to compete with each other, her genetic interests are better off by investing her knowledge and wisdom and skills and training into her children and her children's children. Menopause
Mhm.
was invented by biology through the randomness of natural selection, all that. But it was invented as a way to protect the importance of older women in our species. And I'm not, again, this is not just a cutesy story because we've now discovered menopause in some other species as well, right?
Mm.
It's particularly been studied in the toothed whales. The toothed whales are not the baleen whales like blue whales and humpbacks, but the ones that actually have teeth. And the killer whale, the orca, is the one which is best studied. And again, the women undergo reproductive senescence, menopause. The males do not. Why not? Because the males don't lead the hunting packs. The males are largely solitary and territorial. The women lead the hunting packs, and the hunting packs generally are their children and extended family. You can have grandchildren in there too. And because in Wales, they have hunting grounds that spans hundreds and hundreds of coastlines. And the older women know where the seals are. They know where the
Mm.
current goes. They know where to hunt. And so for them to just keep creating children would not necessarily be good for the group, for themselves, for the species, but it would be good if instead of doing that, they're free to lead the pack, to teach the hunting ways, to create and build on the cultural reservoir of knowledge and wisdom in the species. And the most fascinating thing about menopause and orcas, remember I talked about in humans, men and women have about the same lifespan, right? Just about, especially if you factor out homicides and suicides and accidental deaths, men and women pretty much live the same lifespan. But reproductive senescence happens halfway in between birth and death, roughly. In whales, it's not that. They both peter out at 30 or 40 years. But with women, they keep living. And in men, they die. So male orcas only live 30 or 40 years, and then they're done. But female orcas live 30 or 40 years, undergo menopause, and then keep living. We've seen orcas over 100 years old because they're so valuable that the lifespan has been extended beyond the reproductive years purposely because, and I think that's the model. I really do think that's the model for human society. I think that when we were living in small groups, when we were migratory hunter-gatherers, we weren't tied to the land, we were in our ancestral state for probably a couple 100,000 years. We were led by wise older women. And that's honestly how that cultural knowledge just exploded, right? Every generation didn't have to figure it out. They were taught. All species are taught a little bit. They teach each other, but this is to a whole other level, right? It's the skill sets that we develop, and the women pass that on. And I think that I wish biologists would get more on their soapbox about things like that, about gender diversity, about the value that menopause teaches us, the value of older women. And if you look at the nations that have been run by older women, and they run the spectrum from right wing to left wing and policy differences, there's all kinds of important policy differences among the women who have become powerful, whether it's in Argentina, the UK, Germany, of course, Mexico. Women run the spectrum. You will find women that agree with your politics and women that don't. And there's not like a hard pattern there. But the pattern that you do find when women are in charge is stability, not a whole lot of belligerence, and generally lack of corruption. It's not immune. I'm not saying women are magical creatures and they never make mistakes or incorruptible. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying the tendency, the trend, the dimorphism in our spectrum tends to be that female leaders are less corrupted and less belligerent and more long-term thinking, because short-term gains win elections, right? But long-term thinking promotes stability. And so even the women leader who I really disagree with their politics, they were not corrupted and they had a vision and they executed it with wisdom. So I think we should be electing more women. Honestly, if there was a referendum to say only women could serve in Congress and cabinet level positions, I would vote for that referendum. I think men have dominated our politics for so long. I would love to see what happened if it went the other way.
Me too. Hell yeah. That would be amazing. Can we just try it? Can we just, after this shit show, I literally feel like that. Did you see the Barbie movie?
Of course.
I feel like we're in that scene where we come back and the Barbies are like, wait, we solved it all. Look. And then the Kens took over and we're like, what? And then everybody has to snap out of it again.
Life imitates art, imitates life. I think that movie is layered. I really think it really is an interesting take. And I think it's a lot of what I've been talking about. It's men should not be afraid of women leaders because women leaders generally do not seek dominance over men. They just don't. It's just, I don't.
They actually, we want actually everyone to thrive. At least that's my view. I'm like, I want all of us to, because that's better for every metric. It's better for GDP. It's better for everything. It's better for unemployment. It's better for like well-being and health. Like,
I agree.
If people aren't well mentally, emotionally, physically, we can't, like you're saying, that long-term stability. And gosh, it's just I'm like, are we in a simulation where we are being punked and shown everything? Like, here's the result when you let these things get totally out of control.
Right.
Like, is that what we're living in? It's so
Um,
weird. I keep
I
waking up
mean, the
every day
parallels to
thinking,
our current time are pretty dark periods of our history. That's the problem. It's mirroring some of the worst times that we know about. So
yep.
will it, pardon me, will it get as bad? That's what we're now waiting for. And it's at this point, a majority of the country elected this particular regime. We can't even, Hillary Clinton did win more votes than Donald Trump. We tend to forget that through technicalities of
Mhm.
our electoral system, he begrudgingly won a legitimate election, but way more people wanted Hillary Clinton as the leader. We can't say
Mhm.
that this time around. So we have to now endure at least the beginning of this until the rule of law is now being completely ignored. Who knows?
Yeah. Who knows?
Let's get back to talking
Who
about sex so
knows?
we can have some fun.
True. Oh my gosh. What did we not talk about so far? I feel like there's so much in here and your book is such a wealth of knowledge and I encourage everyone to grab it and we'll link it in the show notes for you guys. But the sexual evolution, anything else that we didn't touch on? I feel like I could talk to
I
you about
mean,
all of
the
these
one
things
topic
for
that
hours.
didn't come up today, we didn't talk
Hmm.
about monogamy and that
Mm.
much. And that's another topic that it's not in the news as much right now because of everything else going on. But as I was writing the book, a big phenomenon that I was reacting to was more and more young people are eschewing even the relationship boundaries and barriers and definitions, where
Mm.
polyamory and consensual non-monogamy or ethical non-monogamy, serial monogamy. Marriage rates are declining, and age of first marriage is continues to rise. And of course, some people are, again, they think the whole civilization is crumbling because of this. But I think these are perfectly normal things that fluctuate over time. But I do think there's something interesting with the approach, the non-monogamy approach, because it's forcing us to finally contend with the fact that among other animals, pairing up and sexual fidelity don't follow one from the other. And so the idea that you can't build
Mm.
a life with someone correctly unless you're also not having sex with anyone else. Like, why is that a requirement? Now, I'm not saying
Mm.
that's bad. By the way, people sometimes misunderstand my position. I'm not like a fervent non-monogamist, like attacking monogamy. Monogamy is fine. It's great. And if it works for a
Mhm.
couple, I see the value in it, no question. The point, though, is that when people get so upset about what other people are doing in their relationship and the ways that they want to live, and I know long-term couples that decided not to move in together. They love each other, but they just like having their own space and that kind of
Mhm.
independence, but they've been together for 25 years. Who are you to say that's not appropriate or not
Right.
legal or not to be? Why should we shun or in any way shame them because they found their own way? And I think that's really with that parts of the book, what I'm talking about is not a one size fits all, hey, let's all do this. No, that would be just as bad. It would just to switch it
Right.
for one poison for another. But the point I would make is that why not let people explore this and do it their own way? Because what we see if we look at, for example, hunter-gatherer tribes all over the world, and there are several of them left that really live in a state of nature, they approach this totally differently. Each one of them does their own thing. There are some that are true free-for-alls. Some of them have very strict social controls where you have even sex segregated social life, like men and women never interact except to get pregnant,
Mm.
right? There's and everything in
Wow.
between. You have all kinds of differences. Now, are you going to go up and tell them that what they're doing is unnatural? Of course not. That would be silly. Just like telling a
According to
chimpanzee,
what? Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
Whatever they do, and you find these different in the anthropology literature, we call it mating types. That's like the
mhm.
different kinds of arrangements: monogamy, promiscuity, polyandry, polygyny, whatever. There's lots of those, and there's many different examples among humans. So the fact that humans now in Western and industrialized society are playing around with that a little bit, why should that be so surprising or upsetting? And it certainly
Mhm.
doesn't affect you if you want to do a sexually exclusive marriage, permanent, long lasting, go for it. You make that work, go for it. I'm never going to
Yep.
try to talk you out of that. Why would I do that?
Hmm.
I'm happy if you're happy, right?
Right.
But it's just why not offer that same grace to your neighbors who see it a little differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love this. This is such a cool conversation. And I hope everyone who's listening to this grabs a copy of your book. Is it available in audio form as well?
Yes, it is.
I
Yes,
know
it
a
is.
lot of people love
Yeah,
to
Daniel Henning is the
listen.
narrator. He does a great job. I'm
Oh,
always,
cool.
when you get an audiobook, of your book. It's like, how are they going to deliver my jokes? Because I like
Yeah.
a lot of jokes in my book. I like jokes. And he does a great job. His pacing is funny. His comedic timing is funny. His pronunciation of science terms is great. So I really
Awesome.
recommend the audiobook if you like books that way. His name is Daniel Henning. He's the narrator. I wanted to read
Amazing.
for it, but they were like, no, we have the pros do that. And I'm glad he does a great job. I couldn't do better.
Oh, that's amazing. Where else can people find more about you, your work, keep
Well,
up, say
fortunately,
thank you?
I'm the only Nathan Lents that comes up when you Google. So yeah, I am on social media. I will say I pretty much use it just for this public facing professional life. I'm not a fan of social media in general. I'm trying to wean myself fully off of it.
Mhm.
But because I don't really use it that much personally, I do respond, to DMs and stuff because I'm just using it to talk about my work, my books,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. So if you Google me, my email is easy to find, my social media accounts are easy to find, and I generally do respond. If I get the message, as long as it's friendly, I do tend to respond. So I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Cool. We need to get you on Joe Rogan and Armchair Expert.
I'd
Those
love to. I
places
would I would
too.
appear on the Joe Rogan show. I really would because I think his
I think it'd be
audience
helpful.
I think his audience could really benefit from these kinds of discussions because if they can see past it as an attack and not see it as an attack and rather see it as an invitation, and I think that I would love to reach his audience. I hope one day I will because
I think
I
you
I, I
will.
haven't given up on the world just yet. I'm despondent, I will admit. I'm pretty
Yeah,
despondent these days, but I haven't
makes
given up
sense.
because I've had conversations with people and I'm pretty good at extending a compassionate being a compassionate conversation partner with people that disagree with me. I've developed a thick skin around that, partially as I think it's partly my duty to do that, to try to nudge people along and with
Mhm.
empathy. So I would love the opportunity to go on Joe Rogan. I wouldn't just be throwing punches the whole time. I would try to invite them into, hopefully, I think a better way of looking at the world.
Mhm. I think that would be incredible. A true public service.
From your
Well,
lips.
yeah. Everybody listening to this, maybe email Joe Rogan's team, get in his comments, and
Yeah, there you
suggest
go.
Nathan as a guest. I bet we can make it happen.
That's the challenge. The
I think
audience,
we can.
you've heard the challenge.
I'm gonna put that out there and cross my fingers and do what I can. I think that would be really impactful. So thank you again for being here. It was so fun to share this time with you. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I know this conversation is so valuable. And again, go grab that book, listen to it. We'll link everything in the show notes for you so you can connect with Nathan and with his book, The Sexual Evolution, How 500 Million Years of Sex, Gender, and Mating Shape Modern Relationships, which so helpful because that is such a mystery for so many of us, and you have the research to back it up. So
Thank
thank
you.
you again.
Thank you.
Thank
This
you
was a lot
everybody
of
for
fun.
tuning in. Yeah, it was great to be with you, and thanks everybody for listening. I will chat with you next week.
Bye bye.
Keep your mind wide open, keep your soul aligned. You've got all the answers waiting there inside. You're not alone. Take a throne like nobody's business, like nobody's business.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of Like Nobody's Business. So, what did you think? I hope you found this episode absolutely enlivening. If you loved it, I'd be so grateful if you'd help me spread the word by sharing this episode with a friend or a loved one you know would feel supported and encouraged by this too. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you won't miss an episode. It's also infinitely helpful to me and to my team if you take a moment to rate and review the podcast so that other trailblazers like you can find this resource, know it exists, and step out of struggle and into more ease. Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today and for taking this space to receive nourishment for your greatest vision. And in case no one told you this today, you are wildly brilliant, beautifully wise, and radically trustworthy. Keep shining your light so that all of those who need what you're here to share with our world can see, feel, and experience your unique medicine. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Nobody's business, like nobody's business.